My name is Diedra Kelley. I'm one of the co-directors for the Romare Bearden Foundation. We are filming at Powerhouse Arts in Gowanus, Brooklyn. Powerhouse Arts, a Brooklyn-based nonprofit founded in 2015 to repurpose the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Power Station. It's been converted into a state-of-the-art production and fabrication facility for ceramic, print, and public art making. And we are here with Eric Shiner. Eric is the president of Powerhouse and also one of our board members at the Romare Bearden Foundation. So we want to do a small little highlight on Eric and to really get his ideas on being a board member. So I'm going to, for the record, read a little bit about his published bio, and then we'll get into asking some questions of Eric. Welcome, Eric, by the way.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Eric Shiner became president of Powerhouse Arts in 2022. Eric Shiner was most recently the executive director of Pioneer Works in Brooklyn. He was formerly artistic director of White Cube Gallery and senior vice president of contemporary art at Sotheby's. Eric was also most notably at the Andy Warhol Museum. Mm-hmm. And you started your career at the Warhol Museum as a curator, but when you left, you were director.
The first time. But I started there as an intern the year that we opened in 1994 and worked there for a year. Wow. And then went off and did my life, and then many years later went back. But years before, in 1994, I was asked to be the first curatorial intern at the Warhol Museum. And I started working there the week that we opened to the public in May of 1994 and did that for a year. And then went off and did my life. And in 2008 was asked to come back to be the chief curator of the museum, which was obviously a great honor and a surprise.
That's wonderful. I didn't know that. Okay, see, this is why we do these kinds of things, all right? You're a leading scholar on Andy Warhol, of course, and Asian contemporary art. You lived and worked in Japan for about 6 years, and you were assistant curator on the inaugural Yokohama Triennial in 2001. You've curated dozens of contemporary art exhibitions around the globe. You were one of the leading Warhol, on the Warhol retrospective that traveled to Singapore. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yep.
So I won't go on and on. Lots of exhibitions and working with nonprofits.
Yep.
And so your work with art, nonprofits, and all of these things, and you're now at Powerhouse. Tell us how you came to work. You talked about being an intern. Mm-hmm. How did you get here?
There are so many ways that I could enter into this, but I'm going to go back to the early days. As a kid, my family were inveterate collectors of all sorts of things, from antiques to design objects to art, you name it. I grew up in a house filled with really interesting things, and the same with my grandparents. And thus, growing up, as a child, I was dragged to every single garage sale, flea market, estate sale, you name it, anywhere within a 30-mile radius of our home in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, which included the tip of West Virginia and eastern Ohio as well. So I just grew up looking at things and scanning tables, looking for objects that interested me. So without anybody knowing it, my family was actually training me to be a curator and honing my eye. Now, of course, as I grew up, I decided that I wanted to have a career that would actually support me, and I thought about being an attorney. So when I went off to college, ultimately, I was a triple major starting off in politics, philosophy, and economics. I thought I would go to law school and either go into a career in law or politics. However, my first semester of college at the University of Pittsburgh, I happened to take a world architecture course, African literature, and Japanese language. And I fell in love with all of those things and realized very quickly that the world, its stories, its histories, and its art were much more appealing to me than the legal structure of those places. And pretty quickly I realized that I was going to shift and become both an art history major and Japanese language and literature major. And that's what I rolled with.
Wow, wow. So say a little bit more about Andy Warhol in Asia. That must have been an exciting project.
Well, it really married my two interests. And it's interesting that after I graduated from college, and my senior thesis ended up being about the socio-political aspects of 16th century Japanese castle architecture, very specific, very, very specific. I couldn't find a job to save my life coming out of college with such a specific focus area, and would have really had to have gone to graduate school immediately to stay focused on that topic. Luckily for me, that opportunity at the Warhol Museum sprung up, and I decided that I would do that, learn more about Andy Warhol, because of course I knew him for his Marilyn Monroe paintings, his Campbell's soup cans, the fact that he was one of the biggest movers and shakers in New York City, etc. So I dove into that world of Warhol and really liked what I saw, and decided after that that I would marry my interest in contemporary art and Japanese art, and actually started looking at what was happening in contemporary Japan. So years later, when I went back to the Warhol Museum, having this vast experience in Asia, one of the first things I really wanted to do was to take a major Warhol retrospective to Asia, because there had only ever been one big show in Tokyo, and the other cities that we focused on, Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Beijing, had never had a Warhol retrospective before. And I wanted to make sure that audiences in those incredibly populous and relevant cities had direct access to Warhol, his story, and his art. So I worked for years to get that exhibition up and running, and luckily it was incredibly successful. We had hundreds of thousands of people at each one of the venues, and was just an all-around huge success. So it was really bringing those two interest areas together yet again in my life in a really rewarding way.
And then many of the institutions you worked with after that were smaller nonprofits, wouldn't you say? And so were you bringing some of what you learned at, I mean, the Warhol is like heavy duty, big, lots of money, you know, easy to get things done when you have lots of money.
Well, that's not true. The Warhol Museum doesn't have lots of money. The Warhol Foundation has lots of money, which is his estate that is based here in New York City, but is a separate entity, although a founder and parent, if you will, of the Warhol Museum. So one of the things that I had to do in Pittsburgh was really focus on revenue generation and fundraising so that we could reach our annual then $7 million a year budget so that we could succeed. And luckily we did that. And luckily I was able to deliver a surplus budget every year that I was there. And, you know, it's always a struggle when you run nonprofits to get that up and running. So actually the things that I've done since have always had increased budgets over and above the cost of the Warhol Museum. Pioneer Works is a $9 to $10 million a year budget, and here we're at a $15 million a year budget. And it's always just about figuring out how to get all of the channels and streams of revenue from a wide variety of sources to come together and make magic happen. And that's why I actually enjoy running nonprofits.
Yeah, yeah. What are some of the common challenges of a nonprofit here in New York City? And I'll say specifically art nonprofits.
I think obviously the biggest thing that we always have to navigate here in New York especially is the rising cost of life here. that means that everything is more expensive, from subcontractors to making sure that your teams have salaries that are going to actually allow them to live here in New York City, which, as we know, is the most expensive place to live in the world. So how do you provide the quality of life to your team that they deserve and still allow them to be able to live here without having to really struggle? And that's hard because, as we know, nonprofit salaries are lower than most for-profit entities. So it's always just juggling the cost of doing business on all fronts here in New York, and that's something that every nonprofit here faces. And if anything, the good news of that is there are so many supportive foundations and organizations that are here to help,
To fund.
to help. And I think there are also a lot of really great resources and opportunities to make money, whether that be through retail, whether that be through ticket sales, etc., because our population not only is massive, but it loves and supports the arts as well.
What would you name, if you had to think about some of the most successful fundraising efforts that you have been either involved with or have seen from the outside?
Yeah, and there are so many ways to do it, from really getting major donors, major foundations excited about the work that you're doing and providing a narrative for them that they respond to and feel passionate about, to the degree that they want to invest in that story. And I find that that's really where, as a successful fundraiser, you have to start. You have to find an authentic connection with the funder so that they want to help, they want to be a part of it, and they want to be proud of the results that are delivered. And I also think that, you have to be creative and entrepreneurial as you're devising new streams of revenue. So at the Warhol Museum, that international touring program was a massive stream of revenue, in that we partnered with corporate sponsors who would underwrite the entire cost of the traveling exhibitions that we would put on, and we would then make a fairly substantial profit over and above the hard cost to support the business of the museum. So that's something that I equally enjoy, is making things that are in alignment, they're mission aligned, and they make sense for the organization. And that's things like retail, it's things like here at Powerhouse event rentals and the activation of this very large hall that we're sitting within, and just thinking outside of the box.
Right, and when you talk about sponsors underwriting these exhibitions, I mean, and the funding that it can bring to the organization, that's above and beyond just the nuts and bolts of traveling an exhibition, so storage, shipping,
Sure.
all of that.
Insurance, all of those things.
So above that is,
Yeah.
something that goes back to the organization.
Right.
That, okay. Because what we have is a small traveling exhibition, as you know.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make a lot of money. It does cover shipping
Sure.
and it charges the venue a small fee,
Right.
I guess,
absolutely.
and covers all the shipping. But we haven't really thought about it being a sort of over and above
Yeah.
that part.
I'm always
to really
thinking about
fund and
how
bring more.
over and above can happen, and that's really aligning with usually for-profit corporations that want to be connected to the brand of the artist, the brand of the museum, the brand of the foundation, and utilize that in a way that helps them to craft the narrative of who they are and what their company stands for and believes in. So in the case of the Major Warhol Traveling Exhibition, we worked with BNY Mellon, the Bank of New York Mellon, Christie's, The Economist. We had a couple of partners who all came together. But for BNY Mellon, it was a really tight narrative in that, like Andy Warhol, they navigated the space between New York City and Pittsburgh. And that was Andy from Pittsburgh, but obviously came to New York and became a world famous artist here. So that alignment made a lot of sense. They, at that specific moment in time, were looking to expand their business into Asia in a very big way. So delivering art, their story of Pittsburgh and New York to Asian audiences, all tied together with a perfect bow.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Do you find that a lot of nonprofits have trouble building in those sorts of for-profit ideas into
It's
their
not,
fundraising?
yes, 100%. And I think it needs to be repeated often and vigorously that just because we are nonprofit organizations does not mean that we can't be financially successful, financially literate, and making a profit at the end of the year. It's different than a for-profit corporation in that any surplus that you have coming in at the end of a year doesn't go to dividends, it doesn't go to shareholders, it doesn't go into the owner's pocket. It stays in the organization, and it can be utilized in so many ways. Reinvestment in positions, reinvestment in infrastructure. It could go into the endowment. There are so many things that you can do with that money. So I really would say that so many nonprofit leaders would just do much better, and I think have a little bit more fun if they got out of the mindset that just breaking even is okay. It's okay to make money and reinvest that so that the organization becomes even stronger.
And more fun.
And more fun in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting too, I think, boards are very important with a nonprofit.
Sure.
And maybe you could speak a little bit to the frustration. I mean, you've been on a lot of boards.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are aspects of the boards that are frustrating to you as a thinker. I mean, the way that you think about this. What would you say were some of the frustrating aspects of being involved in small nonprofit?
Sure. I think that anytime you serve on a board, the great bulk of your experience is positive. The frustrations usually arise in bureaucracy, which I think is frustrating to everyone. So even getting a committee meeting or a board meeting scheduled when you have to navigate so many busy people's schedules is really tough oftentimes. And I think most boards that I've served on, there are usually one or two individuals who are the change averse folks who like things done a certain way, the way they've always been done. And that is, frustrating, I think, for a lot of people. But you also have to realize that a lot of people in life don't like change. People are very comfortable in the ways of their world, and that's perfectly natural and normal. So introducing change and the concepts of change is in and of itself a fine art that one learns to navigate as you go on and deal with those people.
It's interesting because most art, so you think about art as being about change, about forward thinking, yes, about something new and unique.
Right.
But then the business of the art is a lot harder because it's dependent on money and these other issues that are not as much fun.
Yeah, and that's the great irony of the art world, the art market, in that any art that we remember in its age was revolutionary, it was new, it was usually reviled, it was usually scary, it usually entered society with a roar. And the great bulk of those that encountered it were frightened by it, scared by it, moved by it in a variety of ways. But the art that we remembered almost always does that, or the artist who made the work always did that. And when we, extrapolate and think that the entire art market, the entire realm of art history rewards and remembers and values radicality, that's very often forgotten. And that is why I continually remind people that that is one of the things that we as human society value more than anything, especially when we see works of art that have risen up through all of those many channels and are selling for tens of millions or over $100 million, all of a sudden that becomes one of the most valuable things that society holds dear. There are very few things that one can buy that go north of $100 million. Skyscrapers sell for less than that, especially in this market. They've certainly sold for more. But when we see paintings selling for hundreds of millions of dollars, which has also happened, there's nothing else that one can buy that costs more than that. So I really start to think, cars?
No.
$400 million car? What
No,
kind of cars?
guess not.
No. Nothing.
Yeah.
Literally nothing.
That's
So
a good point.
all of a sudden, art is the thing that those with resources value more than anything to that degree. Now, of course, those are rare transactions, but they happen, and thus I think that says a lot, that no matter where we stand politically, economically, that almost all of us place value in art, and the deeper our pockets, oftentimes the more value we place on art, because the art market is based on the incredibly wealthy parting ways with their resources in order to live with and convene with a work of art that hopefully means something to them.
And what do you think the impact of an artist legacy foundation can have in this, and role that they can play? I mean, you worked with the Andy Warhol kind of sphere, and then seeing, you know, something smaller like the Romare Bearden Foundation and other foundations like us.
Right. I think regardless of size, the impact can be vast. And certainly with the work that we do at the Bearden Foundation, focusing on art education, education about Bearden, exhibitions about Bearden, making sure that the public knows who he was, why he was important, why his art resonates, not only when it was made, but today, is such important work. Whereas the massive artist foundations, the Warhol Foundation has assets north of $350 million and is giving away 15 to 20 million annually on average, if not more sometimes, in support of exhibitions, in support of radicality, in support of arts writers, so many things that it does to support the arts community. If you think about that cumulatively with both the massively rich foundations and the foundations that might not have the capital resources but have the passion and the drive, you combine all of that together. And in so many ways, those foundations are really just fueling the art world on a number of fronts. It's extraordinary, really.
Yeah. And just as a, you know, organization that focuses on a single artist. I mean, a lot of people look at us and they think that we only focus on Romare Bearden, which is a large part, but also his whole milieu, his contemporary artists. Invariably, when we have, you know, symposias or anything, that we are focusing on other things.
100%. And what his influence on today's contemporary art is, and what it looks like, and why it's important. But also looking at who he was influenced by, because people often forget. We as art historians never forget, because it's our business, but art is a lineage, and it is the handing of a baton from generation to generation. Oftentimes in the handover, the baton is made almost unrecognizable, but its core essence is there, its creativity, and each generation successively reacts to, critiques, provides homage to the generations that came before it. So it's a very long trajectory, narrative arch, and he is a very major player in the 20th century along that timeline.
Well, I know that you are sort of a noted promoter of contemporary art on your Instagram pages, and you collect yourself. Do you have, you know, who are some of your favorite artists, and do you have a philosophy around collecting?
You know, I never name favorite artists, because that would be like naming your favorite child if you had multiple. I don't. So my art is my, you know, progeny, I guess, if you will. But I certainly do have collecting areas, things that I respond to. So in, fairly large buckets, I collect Asian contemporary art. I collect radical art, often by BIPOC women or queer artists, something that is radical in its age, impactful. One of the other things that I collect around is the idea of nature and how we as humans navigate the landscape, how we interact with animals. That's, I guess, growing up on a farm in Western Pennsylvania somehow sunk in on that front. I'm also very interested in text-based artwork and how artists utilize language in a variety of ways to further strengthen their argument and their statements. So I think in a nutshell, those are the main areas. I also like portraiture and the depiction of our human condition from all walks of life, all areas of the world, and how artists see their peers. That's always been very intriguing to me.
Do you have a favorite series or work of Bearden's?
It's almost the same response in that, no, I love the work across the board. And obviously, he too was not only looking at the human condition, but looking at nature and looking at the urban landscape, certainly. And I think so often Bearden is thought of first and foremost as someone who worked in figuration, and the depiction of people is so important in the work, but it's not just that. And the other thing that he did that very few people are aware of are the abstractions, and just thinking about how beautiful those paintings
The late 50s and 60s.
in the late 50s and 60s. I think once people dive in, they realize that he had so many areas of interest and made sure that all of those were included in his body of work.
Now, were you at the Warhol when we had the Bearden Centennial?
Yeah, I did that.
Yes.
That was my show.
Tell us
that's how
about that,
we
your concept
first
for
met.
that. Yeah.
So it was the anniversary of Bearden's birth, if I remember
Centennial.
correctly, right? The 100-year
100
anniversary.
years, yeah.
And I was fairly new at the museum. I was still the curator then. And, I'm from the surrounds of Pittsburgh and, went there for college, lived there for several years after college, and luckily got to know many of the important art collectors in Pittsburgh, even in those early years. And certainly when I came back in 2008, I had even stronger connections with art collectors because obviously they were in many ways our main conduit for support in Pittsburgh. And one notices pretty quickly that almost every major collector in Pittsburgh has a Bearden work in their collection because in so many ways he is a native son. He's a very, very strong presence in Pittsburgh. And a lot of people are very proud that Romare spent time there as a child. And, obviously he spent time with his grandparents every summer. And on the checklist of who you have to own, if you're a Pittsburgh collector, Romare is decidedly near the top, if not the top of that list. So knowing there were so many works in Pittsburgh, I thought, wouldn't it be great to celebrate the centennial of his birth by going to all of the collectors and asking them to lend their work so that we could show the Beardens in private collections in Pittsburgh. And it was a really wonderful show, a really wonderful experience, and there was so much pride in the room, not only from the collectors, but by the public who, that was the main reason I wanted to do it, to show things that very rarely see the light of day by regular folks.
That's right.
So by enticing those collectors to part ways with the work for a couple of months to do this show, it provided access to things that are rarely seen.
Yeah, and that was the idea. That's great. I know that we sensed sort of the excitement and history of Bearden when we did our symposium there in 2010, which would have been a year or so before. And our mutual friend, Alicia Wormsley,
Yeah.
spoke about how, as a kid, she would learn about Bearden in school, which is
Yes.
something that we try to do with our curriculum, because he was such a foundational artist. I mean, very much steeped in, foundation of art. He wrote the book on structure painting. And so, but we felt that. I mean, there was even a little bit of back and forth about what high school he went to, and it was Peabody High.
Peabody, yeah.
And he graduated. He did his last 2 years of high school there, but there were some people there from some competing high schools, so that was a funny moment.
It is, Pittsburghers are very proud of those that go on to fame,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
a lot of people like to take ownership, and sometimes it's true, sometimes it's false. Same about Andy Warhol. There are all sorts of myths about what school he went to. Did he graduate? Did he not graduate? Etc. I mean, there's still to this day a rumor that Andy didn't finish his undergraduate degree at then Carnegie Tech, today Carnegie Mellon University, which is decidedly untrue. We have his college diploma at the Andy Warhol Museum. So proof is in the pudding.
One other question I wanted to ask you was, you agreed to come on the board. You've been on our board now, I think, about almost 3 years.
3 years,
maybe.
yeah.
What do you think is the way that you can best help the foundation, the Romare Bearden Foundation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always there to lend support, answer questions in any way I can. Hopefully, as we grow and progress, I really hope that we can start thinking more about international exhibitions, really start to figure out where Bearden is not known and how to make him more known, and also utilize the resources, the physical resources, the artwork, the archives, the things that remain in the hands of the foundation to our best possible advantage, whether that's a placement of the archive in a famed research institution, through to making sure that Bearden is on the right walls, in the right institutions, in the right cities, and being relentless in doing so.
And I should mention our catalog resume, which we're in the middle of, and it's going very well with the support of the board as well.
And that's
Yeah.
incredibly exciting.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Tell me if you have any questions before I ask the big question about what is your probably greatest achievement. Of course, you're sitting here in Powerhouse. I'm sure this is the pinnacle of your career.
This
No.
is a labor of love by so many people over so many years, and anything that I've ever achieved has certainly been a group effort. I mean, we all say in common parlance that it takes a village, and that is always so true. You can never do anything alone, and there have been great milestones in my career. There have been great disappointments in my career, and I think that's true of everyone. And I think I'll save the answer of what the biggest one is until it's all over and done with, because it may yet still be to come.
It may be that internship you took at the Andy Warhol Museum.
It was certainly a very fun year. I will say
important to
that.
your
Well,
career.
it was foundational in so many ways, but I can safely say that I have lived an incredibly wonderful life, and I'm lucky beyond all thought and consideration, because growing up on a horse farm in rural western Pennsylvania, I never in a million years thought that I would be experiencing the world the way that I have been fortunate to do so. And despite the roller coasters and the ups and downs, I wouldn't change a thing.
And you have meant so much to the art world. You've had a great impact on it, and we're happy to be working with you.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you want to say?
No, I hope that everybody comes to visit us at Powerhouse. We are a massive new nonprofit cultural organization here in Brooklyn. We're sitting in our grand hall, which is 22,000 square feet, in the top third of what was once a turbine hall for the Brooklyn Rabbit Power Company that fueled the trolley car system in Brooklyn starting in 1904. As you see, our walls are bedecked with graffiti and street art, and that was made by artists who actually lived in this building in the 1990s and early 2000s as squatters. And we decided to keep it because graffiti and street art is such an important part of the aesthetics of New York City, especially. And we wanted to make sure that that history wasn't lost. But beyond this space, the building is filled with workshops that fabricate art for artists, play host to membership shops, allowing artists to come in and utilize our equipment and our facilities to make their own work. And ultimately, we're here to support artists writ large and their fabrication needs, but also to make sure that art is a part of our community here in Gowanus.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Which is really, really important, and making sure this is a resource for our neighbors, for young artists, for aspiring artists, and stay tuned. We have a lot of fun things coming up, including exhibitions and performances in this space, a lot of activations in the neighborhood in the years ahead, and we just want to make sure that we're a part of the authentic fabric of Gowanus and its history, and most importantly, its future.
Yes, yes. And one other thing I will just ask you about is, you know, you've been hosting a lot of nonprofit fundraising events here.
Yeah.
Is that something you feel is important for Powerhouse to, you know, because we do lack space throughout the city on how to have
true.
affordable
And yeah, we try to be
fundraisers.
there for partners in our nonprofit space as often as we can. So just last week we hosted Brooklyn Org's annual gala and had over 600 people here in this space for a beautiful dinner and a dance performance, and it was just lovely. But we certainly hope that our nonprofit rates are making it a little bit easier for nonprofits to host larger scale dinners, knowing there aren't a lot of huge spaces like this available. But we also have smaller spaces for smaller dinners and smaller events, but it's definitely part of what we're thinking, like, how can we be a resource for our colleagues? How can they use this to hopefully lift their ship a little bit as well?
Yes, yes. In terms of fabrication, be specific. I mean, what kinds of things are being fabricated here in the space?
Everything from huge public art sculptures through to very small ceramic objects and everything in between. So we will ultimately have 7 workshops. We have 6 right now. Jewelry will be the last workshop to come online next year. But we have a ceramic shop, a print shop, a textile shop, a public art shop, metal shop, and wood shop. And we're fabricating artwork in all of those media. Most importantly, we view this organization as a huge hive of creativity, and the bees are the artists that come here to do their work. And we hope that there will be a lot of cross-pollination, that once the bees start buzzing around, talking to each other, sharing, that we'll start to see collaboration between different media areas. So all of a sudden, an artist who traditionally makes work in ceramics might start to think about what their work would look like if you started to implement printmaking, or if you started to implement metal armatures. Would that allow you to go bigger, stronger, more impactful, etc.? So we're really excited about how this place can be a laboratory for new ideas, where artists can come and really just dream big, and we'll be there to support them.
That's wonderful. Just as an artist, I just commend you on those efforts and all that Powerhouse is doing for the community. It's wonderful.
It's so important, and I always remind everyone, and I'll remind everybody again, that colleagues, none of us would have jobs if it wasn't for artists. So do everything you can, and never forget that artists need our support, and that's hopefully why we all do this. None of us would be here if artists didn't provide the creativity and put their egos, their lives on the line in so many ways, and taking the risk of putting this thing out to the world that represents them and you. Because that is a challenge so much of the time, and it has created an entire industry. So thanks to artists for always being there.
I know that you have done a lot of scholarship. You've been writing a lot about
Sure.
artists in the past. I don't
Sure.
know, do you get time to do any of that? Are you
Not
working
as
on
much as
anything
I
now?
would like, certainly. I wish that I had all the time in the world to write, and I wish I had all the time in the world to teach, as I've also been very fortunate to teach art history at a number of institutions as an adjunct faculty. And hopefully there will be time yet again, because I do believe strongly in sharing what you know with the next generation to make sure that it carries on or is twisted and rethought, which is also very important. But I haven't worked on any major published pieces of late, but never say never. I'm sure there'll be something coming along one day soon.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for all of your work,
Thank
Eric.
you.
And thank you for this interview.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
And thank you for all that you do.
Oh, thank you.